purpose of today's hearing is to examine the ecological impacts of invasive species, to conduct oversight on the National Invasive Species Council's new framework for early detection and rapid response, and to receive testimony on a bill S-2240, the Federal Lands Invasive Species Control, Prevention, and Management Act. The issue we're here to discuss today is at the heart of many important issues that communities face. Every year, out-of-control invasive species populations cost the United States more than $100 billion. The number is substantial, but it pales in comparison to the ecological damage caused by invasive species. In my home state of Wyoming, we deal with many invasive species that compromise water resources and landscape health. As a result of fragmented land ownership and poor forage management, invasive species like cheatgrass now infest hundreds of millions of acres. These infestations threaten soil retention, increase the likelihood of fast-moving catastrophic wildfires, and low-quality forage for wildlife and livestock. They are low-quality forage for wildlife and livestock, and they're an unnecessary burden already taxed of our water supplies. As we all know, catastrophic wildfires destroy wildlife habitat, they contaminate watersheds, and they cause unspeakable damage to our landscapes. Cheatgrass infestations make these fires more likely and ultimately worse when they do happen. As an annual grass, cheatgrass is the first to return after a fire has decimated the landscape. Other seedlings are pushed out by cheatgrass, and soon the landscape is overrun. These monocultures are far more susceptible to future fires, and so the cycle continues. But this doesn't just happen after a catastrophic wildfire. Although they are not here to provide testimony today, the Fish and Wildlife Service has consistently recognized that cheatgrass infestations pose one of the most significant threats to sage grouse habitat conservation efforts. The worst part is that cheatgrass is only one of many invasive species we face. Zebra and quagga mussels threaten our aquatic ecosystems and cause millions of dollars in damage to dams, to municipal water systems, and to agriculture irrigation systems. Land and waters are under constant threat from invasive populations. I know talking with Senator Stabenow, Asian carp has overtaken the Great Lakes and now threaten watersheds downstream. In 1999, Executive Order 13112 established the National Invasive Species Council. The Council was intended to coordinate invasive species management programs around federal agencies. Several subsequent reports from the Government Accountability Office described the councils as widely ineffective, much like the agency's own efforts to stem the tide of invasive species. The concept of a council is not without merit, however. There's an overwhelming consensus that something must be done to more effectively coordinate agency efforts. Last year, attendees at the Western Invasive Weed Summit outlined a set of barriers that hamper their ability to control explosive invasive populations. Among those barriers were lack of coordination and communication among agencies, lack of leadership and accountability among oversight bodies, and insufficient monitoring, compliance, and enforcement. The gaps must be addressed. That's why I introduced S-2240, the Federal Lands Invasive Species Control, Prevention, and Management Act. This bill sets clear targets for reduction of invasive species that, while ambitious, I believe will motivate success with the tools it provides. As part of the target to achieve an annual 5% reduction in invasive populations, S-2240 requires annual reports of the successes and failures of management efforts. It also provides limited categorical exclusions so that when personnel see an area that is at risk for a catastrophic infestation, they're able to react quickly to prevent environmental damage. Land managers want a streamlined NEPA approach for the most critical cases so that the processes which are meant to protect our environment are not inadvertently causing damage. So most importantly, S-2240 encourages use of collaborative partnerships to ensure that management efforts are unrestricted by jurisdictional boundaries. Cheatgrass doesn't stop at the fence line. Control efforts shouldn't stop there either. So I want to thank each of our 5 witnesses for being with us today. Now time to hear from our witnesses, Mr. Glenn Casamassa, who is the Associate Deputy Chief of the Forest Service. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Mike Poole, the Acting Deputy Director of the Bureau of Land Management. Thank you. Mr. Doug Miyamoto, who is the Director of the Wyoming Department of Agriculture. Appreciate you being here again. Dr. George Beck, who is Professor of Weed Science at Colorado State University. and Dr. Faith Campbell, Vice President of the Center for Invasive Species Prevention. I'd like to take a moment to introduce my constituent, Doug Miyamoto. He has served as the Director of the Wyoming Department of Agriculture since 2015. Prior to that, he served as the Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Wyoming Livestock Board. He's a native of Wyoming. He's a University of Wyoming alumni, former NRCS employee. He provides an important, multifaceted perspective on the issues we face today. And I would ask that each of the witnesses try to keep your testimony within 5 minutes.